Okay, in this video I'm going to do a longer drawing of a model where I'm going to focus on shading and capturing the likeness. So first of all, since I prefer not to work on perfectly white paper, I'm going to give this paper a slight tone. Now, it's not going to be the 50% gray that I usually use for charcoal reduction, but I want to get a little bit of tone on the paper. It's going to make it easier for me to get subtle transitions between halftone and lights, all that kind of stuff. I find that it helps to work on a slight tone so you can erase out the lights, highlights, that kind of stuff. Alright, I'm not going to tone the entire paper either because I'm not doing a full drawing. I'm just going to tone the spot where I'm going to draw the head. Okay, so I've got my paper toned. We're going to draw the head in 3/4 view. I'm going to start off with an oval. Her head is perfectly straight up and down. Let's draw an oval that looks like this. By the way, it's generally a good rule not to draw the head larger than life size. So, you can work small if you want, though you're going to have a hard time getting detail. Don't make the head so big that it goes larger than life size. You're going to find that that's going to be unwieldy. Hard to render out, hard to do. Don't do it. Alright, where is our center line? Our center line runs over the oval in the upper half, and in the lower half it's going to run straight. Now, I'm going to keep the construction lines as light as possible. I want you guys to see them, but I don't want them to get in the way of my rendering later. Alright, now I'm going to try to get a likeness. In order to get a likeness, I need to set my proportions exactly right. So I'm not going to assume that her eye level is exactly in the middle of the oval. I'm going to figure out exactly where it is. How do I do that? I'm going to take a measurement. So let's do a little sketch of the model. Going this way, this way. Let's say her eyes are here, her nose is here, here's her mouth. Okay, I'm going to take a measurement. Hold on. Okay, so here's the middle of her eye. I'm going to take a measurement from here to here. So use my proportion measuring tool. And then compare this distance to figure out which one is longer. If I measure this, and then I see that my pencil is hovering slightly above where I think her scalp is, that tells me that her eye level is a little bit higher. If I take a measurement and I realize that this part is shorter, then I'm going to drop my eye level down a little bit. Again, this takes a little bit of practice. When the model has hair, it creates difficulty. I can't really see the scalp, but I can use my instinct, my X-ray vision, to figure out exactly where eye level is. So in this case, I'm going to compare those two distances. So the tip of my pencil lines up with the middle of her eye, my thumbnail slides down so it lines up with her chin, then I work my way up. Alright, so it looks like her eye level is just ever so slightly higher than halfway up. Just a little tiny bit. Boom, boom. Again, we're saying this model's proportions are actually pretty close to the proportions we set down here. That is actually the case. Alright, now I'm going to start indicating the brow line. Again, stay as soft as you can at this stage. Use fuzz, use shadow to indicate these shapes. This is still construction. Some artists will actually geometricize, will create a bunch of straight lines when doing this. I tend not to like doing that. I think it results in a drawing that ends up kind of mechanical, no matter how hard you try to make it organic. Now that we've got our brow line, now I need to figure out exactly where the base of the nose is. Don't assume it's going to be in the middle. In most cases, it's not going to be in the middle. It might be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. I'm going to take a measurement of this to the base of the nose and see how it compares against the base of the nose to the chin. In this model, in this particular model, this distance is slightly shorter. So I'm going to raise this line up a little bit so that this and this are not exactly the same. Most people are going to run either to the halfway point or a little bit higher. If you see a model whose halfway point is lower than the middle, that means they have a relatively large nose. You're going to be able to see it and notice that pretty easily. Okay, so in her case, her nose runs a little bit higher than halfway. All right, We're going to do the same thing with the line of the mouth. We're going to measure the distance from here to the bottom of the upper lip against, actually, the middle of the mouth. So from here to the middle of the mouth against the middle of the mouth, down to the chin, to see which distance is longer. Now, her mouth is slightly open, so I'm just going to go to the middle of her mouth. It looks like, in this case, these distances are very, very even. It looks like the upper lip, this distance here, is a little tiny bit shorter. I'm going to pay very close attention to how I place my architecture, my framework, because if I put the eye level in the wrong spot, or I drop the nose level down too much, it's not going to end up looking like the person, no matter how hard I finesse the features. So be careful by setting up this initial architecture. It's going to lead to capturing a likeness. All right, now let's start sketching in our shapes. Work really light. Make sure your pencil is sharp and long. Do not put sharp lines anywhere. So look for big angles. We have an angle going this way. Look how much further the nose tips beyond the center line. So you can hold up your pencil against the center line and realize that her nostril lines up exactly with the center line here, like this. Let your values build up little by little and stay simple at this stage. We're going to have to move things around. We might have to make some corrections. In fact, I'm certain of it. You want to stay flexible and loose so that you're able to do it. All right, so here is her upper lip. There's going to be more curvature on the distant side, less curve on this side, this way. Notice I am not putting sharp lines anywhere. One of the worst things you can do right now is to put a really sharp outline around the lips like this. Even if I get the shape exactly right, it's still going to look cartoony. It's still going to look flat. So notice, when I'm drawing the lips, I'm keeping the edges really, really soft, and I'm thinking about the shadow. So I'm throwing a little shadow underneath the lower lip this way. Right? I'm indicating the fact that there's a little bit more shadow here. Again, her mouth is slightly open this way, like this. Her lower lip is a little fuller this way. By the way, lips are very rarely the same width, top and bottom. There's always going to be a little difference, right? Sometimes upper lip is narrower than the lower lip, or juts out a little more. You'll never have lips that are exactly the same width, top and bottom, unless somebody's had some kind of Hollywood alteration. All right. Here's her chin. Now that I have the frame of the brow, I've got eye level, now I'm going to start placing the eyes. Now, generally speaking, where the nostril ends, the eye begins. Don't assume it's going to line up exactly with the nostril. In fact, in this model, when I hold up my pencil to the nostril, it just so happens that her tear duct lines up. Now, it might not on everybody. Sometimes eyes are a little more wide apart, sometimes they're a little nearer. I'm going to use the nostril, however, to figure out how much further away or further in it is. That's number one. Number two, I noticed that on this model that her eyes have a very, very, very slight tilt this way, meaning that her tear duct is not perfectly lined up on a horizontal with the outside of her eye. So I'm going to pay attention to the orientation of her eyeball. Not her eyeball, her eyelids. So when I draw her eyelids, I want to make sure that the corner of her eye, the outside of the eye, lines up a little bit higher than the inside. This way. Now, when I draw the eyes, I also want to avoid really sharp lines. Now, there are sharp lines on the eyes. The eyelids can be really, really sharp. At the beginning, though, don't draw them super sharp, because there's nothing worse than drawing an eye that looks like this when you're trying to be realistic, when you're trying to do something that's three-dimensional. So right now, just place the eyes, get their widths. I'm looking for the distance between the bridge of the nose here and the tear duct. And we're looking for that teardrop shape. Right? So we're going to see a flatter curve here, and then as it's wrapping around, we have foreshortening here, and it starts curving a little more here. Let's indicate the iris a little bit, this way and this way. Now we can start carving into the head. So one thing I notice is that her head here is not nearly quite so wide. It starts going in a little bit, going like this. Then her cheekbone comes out. By the way, even here I'm paying attention to overlaps. Notice that her temple is narrower, and then her cheekbone comes out from behind here. Don't connect your lines, right? Notice that her cheek goes in, and it goes in, and then her cheek comes out from behind. So even in this situation, I want to make sure that I'm not putting in a flat contour, because in the head, you're also seeing lots of overlapping shapes. All right, we forgot about the back of her head. Really bad of us. Let's put it in. Now, we made an assumption when we were doing construction that the depth here is about 5/6 the height. You don't need to assume now. You can actually measure it. So I'm going to measure across. I'm measuring from here to here and comparing the width against the height of the head. When I do that, I realize that the depth, the width here, runs to the hairline up here. So it is about 5/6. Don't assume it though. It's going to be different for everybody. And now let's add some cranium here. All right, so here's the cranium. Let's indicate the neck a little bit. You can use a vertical alignment, by the way, to figure out exactly where the neck is. It looks like it's lined up right here, just slightly off our nostril. Don't forget about the neck, the shoulders. I would also include a little bit of the costume in this case, right? It just makes your drawing feel a little bit more complete. All right, now let's find our jawline. We're going to measure from here to our jawline and compare that to the height. So we're measuring from here to here and seeing how this distance compares to the distance here. Let's do that. Okay, sure enough, the distance from here to here comes up to our brow line. So let's carry that over. And now we know that her jawline runs to here. Now, do not put a sharp line here either. We have a plane change, not a sharp line. Right? One of the worst things you can do is take that jawline and put a sharp line there. It's going to make it look cut out. Again, try to avoid as much as possible sharp lines, especially at the beginning. Be selective about where you put your sharp lines. Let's put it that way. All right, now let's indicate her ear. We're going to use our horizontal alignment to figure out that the bottom of her ear lines up with her upper lip here. The top of her ear lines up right through eye level. Her ears run a little bit lower than the average proportions that we set up. So you can see we're basically using our proportion measuring tool to figure out what the general proportions and placement are of the facial features. When you're drawing ears, once again, avoid your sharp lines, use the side of your pencil. Some of these very complicated forms are very difficult to draw with line alone, if not impossible. Okay, now I haven't drawn the hair. We might talk about hair a little bit later. I'm not going to be able to cover absolutely everything in this tutorial. Now that I can see that I have a likeness, and look, there are other tricks to capturing likeness. For instance, I can check the angle from here to the middle of our center line to make sure that they correspond. Do they? Yeah, it looks like I'm pretty close. I think maybe her eye is a little bit larger this way. Once you can see you have a likeness, now you can start rendering. Where to start? Look at the big stuff first. So first of all, let's just really quickly indicate her hair, otherwise it just looks kind of strange. Okay, so I'm just going to get the shape. It starts running off our paper here, going this way, like this. Okay, look for the big picture. I'm looking for light breaks. Where are the light breaks? We have a light break running here, like this, running this way, running across the cheek this way, the cheekbone, going this way, going this way, this way, this way. Look, it's the same as when you're shading the figure. Do not forget these basic principles just because you're drawing ahead. Okay, so here's our light break here, going this way, like this. All right, let's do the same thing on the nose. She's lit a little bit more from the front, so her nose is not entirely in shadow. We see a little tiny bit of a shadow here, like this, and then a little tiny bit of a shadow here, going this way, and then going this way, and then we have a little cast shadow running like this, and there is a pretty strong cast shadow on the lip, running this way, running like that. Okay, shade everything you see a shadow a little bit. Again, we're working with tone paper, so we don't need to shade down all that much. When you're shading a body shadow, shade slightly past the light break in order to introduce a little bit of a halftone. Ears in shadow. We have a fairly strong secondary light coming this direction, but it's still going to be pretty dark, and it's pretty clear where the shadows are. All right. Now, I can use my blending stump. What I like to do is, at the beginning, just soften everything a little bit, like this. Look, how you shade is up to you. I like to create a softened effect at the beginning, and then little by little start getting harder as I finish the drawing. Now, at this point, I might erase a little bit, or I might go in and start reinforcing the forms, which is, I think, what I'm going to do. I'm going to start going a little bit darker. I'm still avoiding putting in sharp lines. I'm trying to make the features as soft as possible. Now again, the construction line I deliberately made sharp, right? These center lines, these eye levels, eye level, singular. Make sure that they're soft enough at the beginning that they disappear. And if they don't, right, then at this point use your chamois to make sure that they're not there. Okay, be really selective about where you put your lines. There's a few of them here. They do exist. But usually, the less lines you put in, especially on the face, the more realistic the result. Okay, let's go into the eyes a little bit. Just sharpening up the facial features a little bit before I start going more into detail. Alright, I've sharpened up some of the features. Now I'm going to go back in with my eraser and start erasing out a little bit. Use your kneaded eraser. Right, we're trying not to get into specifics yet, but start erasing out some of the lighter values that you're seeing. So on this model, the lighter values are here, like this. We're seeing slightly lighter values here, this way. She has a darker skin tone, right? It's not particularly dark, but we're seeing a pretty strong variation from her general skin tone to the highlights. So since I'm not putting in the highlights yet, I'm going to be careful how much erasing out I do. Right, I want to make sure that my highlights come out really strong. Okay, now let's start going back into shadows and getting the appropriate contrast. I'm going to start going a little bit darker here in the core shadow. Always looking for core shadows, always looking for reflected lights, always looking for the big stuff that makes the forms turn and makes my head look three-dimensional. It's going a little bit darker here. There are details in the shadows too. So right now it starts going a little bit darker here. That's going to separate the cheekbone from the cheek. I'm going to continue softening it a little bit with my paper towel. Again, you can use your blending stumps for this. And by the way, I'm using a carbon pencil which doesn't smear quite as much. It sort of retains its texture, the detail, even though it's blended down, which I like. It's a little stickier than the charcoal. Okay, let's get into the eyes a little bit and put in a full range of detail. This is a really, really important principle. When you guys are shading the eyes, try to think in terms of patches of light and dark. I'm going to throw a little bit of shadow underneath the upper eyelid. I'm going to throw a little shadow underneath the lower eyelid, like this. I'm going to sharpen up the shadow when it starts going into the tear duct like this. Obviously, the iris needs to be pretty sharp, like this way. However, I'm not going to render out the eye in full detail, particularly when it comes to eyelashes. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to blur them out a little bit. This is a convention. This is something that existed for a long time. If you render out eyelids like this, it's going to look really graphic and fake. So sometimes on Instagram you see people going like this. Right? No matter how you finesse the eyelashes, if you are drawing them, they're not going to look right. So suggest textures rather than depicting them. Right? Sometimes by suggesting a texture, you get a stronger illusion of form than if you go in and put in a bunch of lines. Unless you're really close to a person, you're not going to see individual eyelashes anyway. And if you can't see something, as a general rule, you probably shouldn't be drawing it. Alright, so here we see the lashes a little bit more from the side. I'm going to blur them out. Do not draw individual lashes. Just don't do it. Alright, now I can start erasing out a little bit with my hard erasers. So on her, the white of the eyes are going to be pretty bright. We can start putting in some of the highlights here. We have a really nice sharp highlight on her eye right here. This way and this way. I love putting in highlights. Right, immediately starts to get the drawing to pop. Right. All right, we can put a highlight here on the tip of her nose. Her teeth are pretty white. We've got a highlight on the lip. This way, we've got a highlight on the cheek here. We've got a really strong highlight here, right in the middle of her forehead. Alright, so now that I have some of the highlights, I probably forgot a little bit of the details here. A little highlight here as well. Now I'm going to go back in the shadows and continue to sharpen up some additional stuff. So I'm going to work a little bit in silence. You guys are going to watch, and I'm going to speed this up so I don't put anybody to sleep. Alright, so this is about as far as I'm going to take this drawing. Obviously I can keep working on it, add more detail. The one thing that is missing is a little bit of the hair and the eyebrows. So let me quickly show you how to handle those, though this will vary depending on what kind of texture the hair is. First step, determine whether the eyebrows, the hair are either lighter or darker than the skin tone. In this case, the hair is darker, the eyebrows are darker. So the first step is to get the general local value of both the hair and the eyebrows. So I'm going to do this. Just fill in the shape of the hair with a dark value. Yeah, I'm not going to finish this entire drawing. I think it's probably even going off the page over here. All right. Let's go a little bit darker. This way. And for the eyebrows, you're going to do the same thing. Just get a little bit of the local value and their general shape, like this. Okay, let's get the hair to go a little bit darker here, and kind of tapers up here a little bit. Going that way. Let's smear this down a little bit. Okay, that needs to go considerably darker, I think. Okay, just as a starting point, again. So we have here, okay, this is 6B. Okay, so let's go really dark here. Okay. All right, step 1, get the local value. Step 2, get the shape. So we know that her hair is being lit the same way the face is. It's lighter here. Think about where it goes darker. Here, like this. And on this side, and it gets a little bit lighter this way. Ignore the hair texture at the beginning, get the form. Do not throw yourself into texture right away, ever. Don't do that. Because if you do, you're going to get the texture, but you're not going to get the sense of roundness in the hair, and your model's head is going to appear entirely flat, even if the texture is convincing. So lighter here, darker here. Get the form. Always focus on the form. Now that you've established a sense of roundness, now it's time to start getting the textures that you're seeing. Be careful though, don't put the texture everywhere. You don't need that much of it to get a convincing suggestion that we're dealing with hair. So in this case, we've got these sort of tightly bound curls. Where you see them a little more prominently, which is usually where the hair is closest to you, make the hair texture a little bit stronger. Don't make the hair texture too strong towards the sides because the hair is further away there. If you make the texture here really, really strong, it's going to make the hair here look as close as the hair here, and it's going to flatten your drawing. So the texture really should only be strongest where the form is closest to your eyeball. Here, like this. And as you're working your way back, make the texture softer. Another one of the many cases where you as the artist have to improve upon what you're seeing, not necessarily improve, but to clarify what you're seeing, to make sure that it ends up looking more three-dimensional than what's actually there. Let's put it that way. So hopefully you can see that the texture here is popping forward, and then because the texture here is smoother, it's receding back in space. Yes, there's lots of little tricks to drawing a portrait. I can't get into all of them, but here's one really, really important thing. Always, always think about where the portrait is closest to you and make those details a little bit more contrasty. So, for instance, this eye needs to be rendered out a little bit darker with a little more detail than the back eye. Otherwise, you're going to have a flattening effect. So the front eye, the closest eye, should have a little bit more contrast to it, a little more detail. The back eye should be a little bit softer. not quite as sharp. This particular line, don't make quite as dark, right? We've got a dark line here. It's the furthest thing back. You want to make sure that those things are kind of soft. You can use a kneaded eraser to soften that, right? The back edge of the form should be really, really light. Make this nostril a little bit sharper, a little bit darker than this nostril. Make the corner details of the mouth on this side a little bit stronger than this side. Again, this is advanced trickery. Basically what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing atmospheric perspective, something that only really applies to landscape, to a portrait. So when it comes to this brow, I'm going to add a little bit more texture to it. I'm going to make it go a little bit darker, a little bit sharper, a little crispier than this brow, which I'm going to soften a little bit. That's going to give you a much stronger sense of depth than what you're actually seeing. Let me just adjust the contour here. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to work on this a little more, then I'm going to take a photo, but I'm going to call this portrait more or less done.